You are no
Last of Us show.
You are
Woke.
And I don't mean it metaphorically or rhetorically or poetically or theoretically or in any other fancy way. I'm
Woke.
straight up.
What's up everyone, another day, another slay, and I hope yours is going okay. Last Sunday, the Last of Us TV series finally wrapped up with its last episode, and I have to say with 100% honesty, it did get worse after episode 3, and overall I think it was slightly worse than the game. However, I still think it's a pretty good adaptation of it. A lot of stuff they added to the show was actually done better than in the games. I think overall my ranking of each episode from best to worst would be 8, 5, 2, 9, 7, 6, 1, 4, and then 3 is the worst episode. Yeah, that's right, the episode I defended the most in the series I actually think is the worst episode. Granted, it's nowhere near bad, it just has the most plot holes out of any of the episodes, and the most amount of scenes from the game that I wish they would have kept instead of cutting them. But yeah, the show, it was pretty good, not as good as the game, mostly because I think the acting in the game is a lot better than the show. Maybe that's personal bias, but in some scenes, especially the one bedroom scene with Joel and Ellie, they don't hit nearly as hard as they did in the game. But really, that was exactly what I expected, and shit, if it only takes them a slightly worse adaptation of the first Last of Us to TV in order for the writers to get a second shot at hopefully fixing the train wreck that is Last of Us 2, I mean, I'll take this shit any day of the week. However, Synthetic Man is back, here to finally give us the truly unbiased, non-political review of the Last of Us HBO show, where he complains about how they demasculinize Joel because he cries?
The fact that he cries, he actually cries, man. I don't have a problem with male characters crying when it feels earned. This is not earned, it comes out of nowhere.
Gets mad that a preacher is portrayed as a pedophile.
But the cannibal pedo is also a Christian priest. But a fake priest, as he was a teacher before the apocalypse and claims he found God. But guess what? It's all bullshit. How many times have we seen this trope before?
Pulls a fucking Quantum TV.
But it's also an underage lesbian love story.
And of course, complains about all of the wokeness invested in this show.
And that purpose is to, quote-unquote, correct the mistakes of the original game. HBO's Last of Us is his true vision for what he wanted the first game to be. Race swapping is bad and will always be bad, wasted everyone's time for a gay love story plot that wasn't in the original game at all. And they are led by this short, fat woman with a high-pitched voice. Every miscast in this show was done on purpose. You're wrong. To warp your mind. To insert ideas in your head.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay!
All in the name of equality. Sam is deaf for no reason. Joel has finally reunited with his brother Tommy, and he's married a black woman. I'm a noticer, and I'm noticing right now. Apparently Jackson is a communist community.
Neil Druckmann ought to be arrested for his crimes against the right wing. So yeah, now we have an even better review than his previous Last of Us review, where before he had just spent 20 minutes bitching about gay people, now we have him bitching about everyone else. So enough talking and let's see what YouTube has shout out today.
You're not gonna
Make fun of a retard.
Are you Jack?
Yeah, in the face. Why?
HBO's The Last of Us Season 1 has just wrapped up, and at the end of the day, it is an almost good video game adaptation. I was actually wrong when I said this was a completely pointless adaptation. No, it has a purpose, and that purpose is to, quote-unquote, correct the mistakes of the original game. Originally, it was rumored that last year's remaster would change the original story to suit Neil Druckmann's vision.
No, that was a dumbass conspiracy theory probably made up by r/The Last of Us 2. I'm genuinely willing to put money on it.
And thankfully that rumor was incorrect. Instead, HBO's Last of Us is his true vision for what he wanted the first game to be.
I mean, yeah, giving him access to the TV format gave him the ability to tell a more grounded, realistic story with no gameplay break segments to hold him back. I'm stealing this line from The Closer Look, but yeah, The Last of Us HBO is basically like the second draft of that story, where most of the stuff from the game stays the same, but the only things that can make it better really change. For example, Bill's storyline is a much better parallel to Joel and Ellie's, except it's in reverse now, to what it was in the game. In the game, it showed what would happen if Joel continued to close himself off from Ellie. In the show, it's now what can happen if Joel opens himself up to Ellie. And it sets up Joel eventually breaking down his emotional barriers later on in the season. In the game, just showing what can happen if Joel closes himself off to everyone again was kind of redundant now that I think about it, because he already is closed off to everyone, and he's like that for like over half the game. In the adaptation, they show why he needs to open himself back up again in order to be happy again with Bill and Frank, and then they remind him of the dangers of doing that with Sam and Henry in the next couple episodes, perfectly setting up Ellie's confrontation to Joel in the 6th episode. Even better than the games in my opinion. Again, I just wish that confrontation was better acted.
And to nobody's surprise, at least to the people who've been paying attention since The Last of Us 2 released, it is inferior to the game in every way. Now, because I decided to stop covering this episodically, I will very briefly give my thoughts on every episode and then give you my opinion of the season as a whole. Now, of course, for episodes 1 through 3, I already covered them in detail, so go check out those videos if you'd like to hear my extended thoughts. But basically, long story short, race swapping is bad and will always be bad. There is no context in which it's good. And if it doesn't matter, then why did they change it?
It's not that it doesn't matter, it's that who the fuck cares? If the character is race swapped and the actor they hired is genuinely shit and nobody has any idea of who the fuck they are, then yeah, I can definitely get people calling this shit woke. Take for example Ariel in that shitty new Little Mermaid movie. Like from the trailer, the actor is like an actual fucking robot. I have never heard any of the things she's in aside from like the Lion King remake, and she doesn't even have a fucking named role in that movie. So yeah, calling that a woke race swap, I 100% get. Granted, I don't know why the fuck people are getting so pressed over it. I mean, from the moment the remake was announced, we all knew it was gonna be shit, so I don't know why anybody was expecting more than that, but whatever, that's besides the point. Point is, every race swapped actor can be said to be like that for some other reason than because they are X-race. Pedro Pascal, he looks like Joel, and he's been getting increasingly more and more popular following The Mandalorian. You might not believe that, but I know a shit ton of people that started watching The Last of Us just for Pedro Pascal. Nico Parker, she's a damn good actor, probably the best performance of the first episode. I know Pedro definitely had to do a lot to make Sarah's death scene believable, but the more I look about it, the more I realize Pedro's lack of tears in that scene really made it pale in comparison to the game. Nico actually had to pretend to be scared that whole 15-minute segment of the initial outbreak, and if you pay attention to her facial expressions during the whole thing, she's actually fucking killing it. I will admit though, I still think it would have been way better if they had made Sarah adopted in the show. It would have made Joel's eventual love for Ellie be a better parallel, since both Ellie and Sarah wouldn't be his biological daughter. It would also shut up a lot of people about this, which, I'll be fair, I kind of get the criticism towards Sarah now because she looks absolutely nothing like the biological daughter of Joel. I still don't really care that she was race swapped, but it's just kind of immersion breaking when you have this black girl who's supposed to be the biological daughter of Joel. Like, you could say Joel was married to a black woman when he had Sarah, but they don't even mention that, and it's never implied anywhere. So saying that would just be kind of doing the writer's job for them. Gabriel Luna sounds exactly like Tommy. If you watch any of his scenes and just close your eyes, maybe listen to a comparison between the original voice actor for Tommy, you literally cannot tell the difference. It's fucking insane. I'm genuinely pissed off Gabriel Luna wasn't in more of the season because he is such a fucking fantastic Tommy. Then there's Rutina Wesley, who's Maria in the show, which kind of follows the same thing I said about Sarah. She's a phenomenal actor. That's why they casted her. I guess you could make a point about her being a race cast, but there is just enough evidence to prove that as there is to prove that point wrong, so it's completely up in the air. And then there's a deaf kid they hired for Sam, which that's because Sam's deaf now in the show, which we'll get to that point later on. And I can't remember any of the other race swap characters, to be honest. But yeah, there we are. Aside from the one fact that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin are those damned woke liberals, there is next to no proof of these actors being race cast. I'm sorry, but you might as well be pulling this shit out of your ass. Who the fuck cares? Yeah, I mean, it's not a good thing that they changed the race of these characters, but the actors are all fairly competent. Pedro and Bella having varying levels of consistency with their quality of acting, and they still feel like they're characters in the game with how they act, except for maybe Pedro in some scenes, but that's for a reason we'll get into in a bit. So really, it's not a bad thing either. It's just there. Like, there's no arguing in this because everyone's gonna have their own opinion on it that can have a case be made for it. So there's not even a point in debating this shit.
You know it matters. The showrunners know it matters. That's why they did it.
And does that change anything from the quality of the show? Like, adaptations aside, does the race of these characters affect anything from the objective quality of the show? Aside from the thing about Sarah, which I guess I can give you that one. No, it doesn't. From an adaptation standpoint, I guess you're right there, but you shouldn't be judging this as an adaptation. You should be judging it on its own, because that's all that the majority of people that are going to be watching the show are even going to know. Most people are not going to have already played the game going into the show. They're not going to know that Tommy was originally white in the game, or Maria was originally white. They're gonna see, hey, that's a good actor, or hey, that's a bad actor, and it breaks my immersion of the show. Having accurate looking characters to those in the game can help with fan service in the show, like how I said Tommy sounds exactly like he does in the game, which is cool, but that's all these things are. Cool. You should not be building your show on fan service. If you do that, you get a complete train wreck of something like Avengers Endgame. Another example is the 1997 miniseries of The Shining, which you could say was a fantastic adaptation because pretty much everything from the source material was in that. However, it was an awful miniseries because a lot of the stuff that was in the source material doesn't translate directly to screen well whatsoever.
Of course, then we have the Bella Ramsey situation, which I think I've said enough already, but I will say once again, this was absolutely a miscast, and it is incredibly distracting every time the camera zooms in on her face. Other than that, most of my criticisms of episode 1 and 2 are nothing too major, but then we get to episode 3, which derailed the entire show, wasted everyone's time, for a gay love story plot that wasn't in the original game at all, completely ruining any subtlety around Bill whatsoever, and ultimately had nothing to do with the apocalypse at all.
I'm not going to waste your time with this part because I have a whole other video debunking this part, but simplifying that video down, it's a parallel to Joel and Ellie using basic show don't tell methods.
So now that we're 3 episodes in, and Joel and Ellie have barely gotten to know each other, they don't like each other at all, I think this is about the point that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin realized that Ellie was completely unlikable up until this point. So now in between episodes, her character just magically changes, becomes much more like the Ellie from the games, more playful, more friendly, and so they try to salvage her character from this point forward.
The fuck are you on? Did you miss any of this shit?
Fuck you. Hold out your... State your name, slowly.
Veronica. Same as yesterday. And the day before? What are you doing?
Killing time.
Well, what am I supposed to do?
I'm sure you'll figure that out.
Your watch is broken. Holy shit, I'm actually outside. Jesus Christ. Oh,
If she so much as twitches. Don't.
yes, sir, I would like your finest suite, please. Yes, ma'am. Would you like me to take your luggage? Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am.
You're a weird kid.
You're a weird kid. Oh, fuck!
Like, I get you're a fucking redneck and have severe brain damage from all the gunpowder you've been snorting off your conservative flag, but like, you would actually have to not have watched the first 3 episodes at all to say that Ellie doesn't act like she did in the game. The fuck?
I'm gonna be honest with you, they still failed. Not nearly enough time was spent this season with Joel and Ellie slowly building up their relationship.
You know what? I'll give you that. The pacing for this show is honestly pretty awkward, and I really think it should have been 10 episodes, or at least given a few more episodes the hour-plus runtime they gave to episodes 1 and 3. If I were to say which ones needed it, I'd say episode 5, 6, and especially 9. For 5, I think they could have just used Joel, Ellie, Sam, and Henry all bonding together way more, like just a scene or two. Episode 6 rushed through adapting the college level in the game way too much. Like, they literally went through that entire level in the span of like 7 minutes. That is fucking insane, and they needed way more time for that. Episode 9 obviously is the really odd one out here because, I mean, episode 9 is the climax of the fucking show, which it's solid, don't get me wrong, but them cutting out the part where Ellie gives Joel the picture was really disappointing to me. I guess you could also throw in episode 4 to this list because that episode was also way too short. Like, Kansas City does not feel dangerous at all in the show. There was one scene of them getting attacked by the hunters. In the game, those motherfuckers were on every damn corner. They should have shown more scenes of Joel and Ellie bonding in that episode, and more of the hunters doing fucked up shit. I thought they were gonna do that with episode 8 with David's group and make David's group more fucked up, but they didn't, and honestly, that was really disappointing to see.
And you could say that's part of the video game adaptation process, But the entire point of the game is that we as a player get more attached to Ellie over the course of the game, which helps us understand Joel's decision at the end. So if you drop the ball on this incredibly important story component, then the adaptation is completely fucked. You screwed up. Time to go back to the drawing board. These next 2 episodes use the time that the player would be fighting off this clan of bandits or scavengers, whatever you want to call them, and instead fleshes them out and turns them into their own faction, essentially, who rebelled against Fedra in the region. And they are led by this short, fat woman with a high-pitched voice who is not intimidating in the least.
There. Have I satisfied the necessary conditions for you to talk?
Yeah, no, I'll also give him this one. Kathleen is so fucking miscast in the show. Holy shit. Like, I'm sure the lady is like a solid actor, but this was not the role for her. She did not seem like a leader. She didn't look like one. And it is insanely hard to believe that she led this entire faction against Fedra. That being said, I really liked her addition to the show on paper. Giving the hunters an actual motive for wanting to hunt down Sam and Henry was such a good idea. And she could have been a really interesting villain for those 2 episodes. However, her execution was god awful, and that's probably why a lot of people hate her addition to the show. And honestly, I agree. If her execution was going to be this bad, they might as well not have included it at all. It's kind of funny. Kathleen is like every problem that I have with Last of Us 2 all wrapped into one character. Interesting idea, could definitely work if they had the right talent to execute it, but they didn't, and it fell flat on its face.
This is the most immersion breaking thing that has happened so far. Do you really expect me to believe in an apocalypse situation where the quote-unquote fascist military faction has been dissolved in this region, which means it is lawless, that the rebels are going to follow this tiny fat woman who shows no leadership skills over the next 2 episodes whatsoever? She just barks orders at people and is grumpy the whole time. This is so fucking stupid, and they did this on purpose. If you don't think every miscast in this show was done on purpose, you're wrong.
What? So the creators are just sabotaging the show on purpose. Look, if they were doing that, we would have something that's actually dog shit. An example of that would be like the Halo show, where the creators actively despise the material they're working on.
You can call me a conspiracy theorist all you fucking want. It's not going to change reality that this was done on purpose to warp your mind, to insert ideas in your head, falsehoods that do not represent reality in any way, all in the name of equality or some supposedly altruistic goal that will never happen because it doesn't represent biological reality.
Oh my fucking god. Right when you were getting a few points right, you had to throw it all out the window to push your stupid ass anti-SJW shit again. No, Sleepy Joe isn't hiding under your bed trying to bite your fucking dick off to turn you into a woman. You can calm down. There isn't much to be bitten anyway. He isn't putting his semen in the COVID vaccine. Where is the fucking proof that they did these miscasts on purpose? Oh, look around you. It's staring right at you. It's the fucking flat earther arguments. Can you find anything that they've said that told you that these were diversity casts or something like that? Because I watched all of the behind the scenes post-episode interviews, rewatched every episode multiple times. Shit, I even listened to every episode of that podcast they put out side by side of each episode of the show, and I can find absolutely nothing. If you have evidence, cool, but show me.
This was just fucking idiotic, and it was a complete waste of time. They could have handled it exactly the way the game did, and you would lose nothing of value. And these 2 episodes also represent a much larger problem with this show, in that there's almost no action whatsoever.
Did you miss the action sequence that took up like 12 minutes of episode 5 that honest to God is like the best action sequence of the show? Because I mean, that's the thing that made episode 5 my second favorite episode for me.
Now you could say gameplay is not really canon. That is a debate that goes on a lot with story-based games. But I think it really takes away from this epic quest or adventure or Herculean task to go across the country if they only fight zombies, what, like 3 or 4 times over the course of the show?
Yeah, no, I'll give them that. This is a zombie show and they go entire episodes without showing a single zombie. And really the only truly great zombie action sequences are in episodes 1, 2, and 5. Not to mention the one zombie action sequence in episode 5 is like the last major one for the rest of the show, which is honestly really disappointing. Again, I think the show should have been much longer, maybe a couple episodes longer or have an extra episode. I don't care. Do both for all I care. Just give us more time with Joel and Ellie and give us more time with the zombies.
And there's only a couple evil human faction groups, and they only get in a handful of gunfights.
They have every faction that was in the game in the show, even the raiders from the Jackson level. Granted, they don't attack Jackson in the show, they attack Bill's little street area that he took over, but they're still in the show, so I don't know where the fuck that criticism is coming from. Again, zombies, I get it. It doesn't really bother me that much because I don't like The Last of Us for its zombies. I like it for its characters, but I get the criticism. Much like how I get the criticism that episode 3 is nothing like how the game was.
Over the course of 9 episodes, this show really wants to be The Walking Dead, but slightly better written, where it's not actually about zombies, it's about interpersonal relationships between humans and moral ambiguity and all that shit.
Isn't that exactly what The Last of Us is though, and why it's so popular? Like when anyone talks about The Last of Us, they're always like, oh, Joel and Ellie, I fucking love Joel, I fucking love Ellie. I was so pissed off when they killed off Joel at the beginning of Last of Us 2, I fucking hate Abby. Was what Joel did at the end of the first Last of Us a good thing? It's never, oh wow, that zombie has a flower for a head, how scary. I mean, sometimes people talk about the zombies, but it's nowhere near the main talking point. When you talk about The Last of Us, zombies almost never come up because it's all just a backdrop to the real story, which is Joel and Ellie's relationship, which I think they handled fairly well in the show. I mean, again, it's not as good as they did it in the game, but I really wasn't expecting that.
Which would be fine if there were still people trying to kill each other, but so much of this time is Joel and Ellie just hiding, and eventually when they find Henry and Sam, that part is done mostly well. I don't really have complaints. Well, besides the obvious one that Sam is deaf for no reason and has been aged down.
They say this in the fucking podcast. If you do your research or just, you know, pay attention to the damn show, they made him deaf so he relies more on Henry, and they aged him down so that Ellie feels like she needs to take care of someone who eventually dies, and it sets up more why she wants so badly to help make the vaccine at any cost.
I suppose to change the relationship between Ellie and Sam from being one of 2 kids around the same age to Ellie trying to take care of a smaller child, I guess.
Yeah, again, set up for the ending of the show.
If I had to compliment something from episode 4, I'd say the scene where Joel finishes off the paralyzed kid reveals a bit of his ruthlessness that he had in the game. And shortly afterward, Joel teaching Ellie how to hold a gun was a kind of nice moment, I suppose. Cutting out the encounter with the truck that had a mounted machine gun on it was kind of lame, but they slightly made up for it with a version of the sniper encounter in the next episode. Though all the infected erupting out of the ground, and the chick not just shooting Henry when she has him right where she wants him, has to do like her evil villain monologue thing, except it's supposed to be all emotional and deep. No, it's functionally the same as a stupid villain dramatically mocking the hero and then getting killed. And also the tweak to the end of Henry and Sam's story where Ellie knows that Sam's infected is also very stupid and adds nothing of value to the story.
The fuck? That was like one of the best changes to the show they added. What are you on? Literally just play the fucking game again if you want to see everything exactly the same. My fucking god. Ellie trying to save Sam in one moment shows she wants to protect people like Joel does. She thinks she can save the world. She's extremely naive and once again will do whatever it takes to make that vaccine, which is fucking phenomenal setup for the ending. Another thing it has is that it makes people who've already played the game and know how this ends question what's going to happen and if her trying to save Sam is actually gonna work. And it makes the scene where Sam and Henry die fresh again, even if you have played the game before watching the show. Does he use critical thinking at all when it comes to analyzing writing? I mean, from his absolute failure to critique God of War Ragnarok, apparently no.
So I'd say episode 4 and 5 are just okay. They're not bad. They're not really good either. I guess I was mostly entertained outside of the tiny rebel leader woman. That shit was cringe. Now, if it was a roided out monster like Abby leading the rebels, maybe I would believe it. Now, episode 6 is where it goes to shit again. It starts off with Joel giving his name to 2 boomers that he has at gunpoint.
Jesus Christ, do you pay any attention at all? No, he does not. This is not a Last of Us 2 moment. Shut the fuck up. You actually need to stop snorting the gunpowder. Turn off Fox News for like 5 seconds and watch the damn show. Look at the clip he's talking about right here.
Can I come down?
No. Ellie.
Oh, wow.
What did I just say?
Joel, come on, there's like 1,000.
Who's this little psycho?
Never mind her.
Ellie says his name. not Joel. I'll admit, in Last of Us 2, Joel telling Abby his name was stupid as shit. That was so out of character for him, and still to this day makes no sense at all. However, they did not repeat the mistakes of that here. And yeah, he does say Ellie's name a few seconds before that, but she's a 14-year-old girl from over 1,000 miles away who's never seen anything outside of Boston until the show takes place. I highly doubt that two random himbos in the woods are gonna know who Ellie no last name is. And yeah, it's stupid Ellie says his name. She was being dumb there. However, she does that in the game too. She's been shown throughout the entire show and the game to be insanely naive and not have good social skills, so it makes sense. You're picking at shit that's just straight up wrong, and this isn't even a hard show to critique, honest to God. This is a very flawed show.
And you could say, okay, maybe that'll have no consequences, but there's a reason why you shouldn't give your name to strangers in this apocalypse situation.
Yeah, no, that was one of the worst moments of that game, completely assassinating Joel as a character, and they didn't do that here. If you watch the fucking scene, you would know this. Also, even if hypothetically he did give his name to the old people, bros got them at gunpoint. As Ellie says, they're like 1,000. What the hell are they gonna do to him? Again, it isn't like Last of Us 2, where he gives out his name in the middle of the room, heavily outnumbered by strangers all around their mid-20s to early 30s that he hasn't known for more than 2 fucking minutes. That would be, and was, fucking stupid.
Shortly afterward, Joel and Ellie arrive outside of Jackson. Yes, Jackson, not the power plant from the game. And the survivors there use a dog to sniff out if someone's infected that they find. And of course, there's this big build-up dramatic tension moment because the dog is not sure if Ellie's infected or not. And honestly, I didn't really have a problem with this. Obviously, you could argue it was pointless. There's no way the dog was going to bite Ellie, because then the show's fucking over. There's no way Joel could kill all of them. But whatever, it's far from the biggest problem this episode.
No, because it comes up later in the episode where they quote-unquote demasculinize Joel.
So now Joel has finally reunited with his brother Tommy, and he's married a black woman. I'm not going to do what I did for the first episode review, because apparently facts make people uncomfortable. But let's just say I'm a noticer, and I'm noticing right now.
And I am a not carer, and I am not caring right now. The show's version of Maria was pretty good. She felt like how she did in the game, and that's all that fucking matters.
You want to know another thing I noticed? That apparently Jackson is a communist community, even though they have democratically elected officials. Figure that one out.
Yeah, communist systems can have elections. All communist means is that everything done by the group is shared between all of them, which makes sense because this is an apocalypse where everyone is split up into smaller factions because nobody can get along after the apocalypse happened. I learned this shit in my fucking freshman year English high school class, dude.
And once again, the show has us suspend our disbelief that people would honestly vote for this woman to be the leader.
I mean, she was like that in the game, again, so that's just them staying accurate to it. Also, she is way more believable to be a leader than Kathleen was. Like, it is not comparable at all. She still has the I don't give a fuck how you feel type attitude that she did in the game. I mean, she almost kills Joel and Ellie right at the beginning when she meets them. I guess now we're back to the incel rants like in the God of War video where he got mad a woman was overthrowing a kingdom. You can't even come up with a reason why it's unbelievable that she would be a leader. Just look around you. I'm telling you guys, it's the fucking flat earther logic.
And there's even a cameo from Big Schnoz herself. Truly my favorite character from The Last of Us Part 2. But honestly, what's even worse than Jackson being a communist community is that yet another classic masculine hero character has been emasculated. In these last 2 episodes, it looks like Joel's having a heart attack or a stroke. They're not quite clear as to what it is. Until now, they explain he's been having panic attacks because he doesn't think he can deliver Ellie because he's getting too old. Does this sound anything like the Joel from the game? Fuck no. You're lying to yourself if you still think this Joel is anything like the original at this point.
No, and I'll be honest, I kind of had a hard time accepting Joel crying in this episode too my first time watching it. This is definitely something that the Joel we know from the game would never do. But then I paid attention to what they were setting up earlier in the season, the moments that Joel mentioned in that scene and the reactions he gave to those moments, and it all makes a lot more sense. In the game, Joel tried to make Tommy take Ellie for some pretty selfish reasons because he didn't want to to get attached to her, and I'm not gonna lie, for me at least, it kind of made him a little unlikable for a little bit at least. I mean, you got where he was coming from, it made sense, but I remember after that bedroom scene where him and Ellie argue, I'm like, really, Joel? Fuck this guy. And then I proceeded to kill myself playing as him 7 times over because I was pissed at him. In the show, it makes him a lot more human and honestly more likable. He's letting out everything he's been holding in over the course of the last 6 episodes, probably the last 20 years. And it's honestly emotionally devastating for the audience. One could actually say the game demasculinized Joel more than the show did. That Joel was more of a fucking pussy in the game than he is in the show because he couldn't even tell Tommy why he wanted him to take Ellie so bad. He just guilt tripped him into doing it and threatened him with violence. At least the Joel in the show had the balls to tell someone how he felt and straight up cried about it. Joel's portrayal in the game works because it's not as realistic as the show, and he's mowing down hundreds and hundreds of people and infected over the course of a few levels. In the show, this wouldn't really make sense because we don't have all the context of those action sequences showing him to be truly ruthless. Shit, I'm pretty sure in like the first real gunfight we see of this older version of Joel, except for the one with the guard, but even still that wasn't really a gunfight because there was only just one guy and he just runs at him and beats the shit out of him. But that aside, first real gunfight, Joel gets knocked down and almost dies because he didn't even hear the guy coming. No shit, he would be scared and wouldn't be able to protect this girl who he's already beginning to feel some sort of attachment towards. Remember the one scene of him and Ellie talking about Sally Ride, and he knows her so well at this point that he's able to guess her favorite astronaut?
Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Jim Lovell. But you know who my favorite is?
Sally Ride.
Sally fucking Ride.
In the 3-month time jump between episode 5 and 6, they've gotten closer, as would any people do during a 3-month time period all spent walking across the country. And if you like how he was portrayed in the game, cool, I get it. Honestly, I kind of agree. If you like how it was in the show, I also get that.
This is a pathetic shell of a man, which is what I've been saying since like episode fucking 2 in these reviews. There is no way that Pedro Pascal's Joel would have survived 20 years with this personality type.
See, if this were still the games world that we were talking about, yeah, I would absolutely agree. With how people are portrayed in the game as truly, like, evil, yeah, no fucking way this dude would survive with how much he tries to spare people. But from the beginning, they've made it clear, this is a completely different world than the one you know in the game. People aren't fucked up just to be fucked up, they have reasons for it. There isn't as many people fighting as there were in the game, because most of them are in their own factions and in very small sections of the country. And it's implied this version of Joel doesn't get into gunfights as much as the game version of Joel, obviously, judging by the clear lack of them in the show. They also say he was in the quarantine zone for most of the 20 years between Sarah's death and the start of the show. And with how tight of a grip Fedra has over the city, he isn't going to be getting into gunfights that often. So yeah, it makes sense that Joel survived this long because he's been in the quarantine zone. Why do you think in his first gunfight outside of the QZ, in what's implied to be a really long time, I'd guess around like 5-6 years, he loses it and almost dies? Why do you think they struggled so much to kill those 2 clickers in the museum in episode 2? Why do you think at the end of this episode, trying to take on like 5-6 guys at the end of episode 6, he gets stabbed and once again almost dies? I mean, shit, they spell it out for you with a line from Ellie in episode 3.
Someone shot at me and missed.
See, that's cool. Shoot back?
Yeah.
You get him?
No, I missed too. It happens more often than you think.
Because you suck at shooting, or like in general?
If your problem here was the one from earlier where they don't have enough action sequences, yeah, I agree, but that's not what you're saying here. You're saying that the Joel they have in the show is inconsistent with the world they've been building and how he was portrayed earlier, which simply just isn't true.
And you could argue, okay, maybe he was beaten down over all those years, but not once in this show does he act like the vicious Joel, the ruthless Joel that we know from the original game. The fact that he cries, he actually cries, man. I don't have a problem with male characters crying when it feels earned. This is not earned. It comes out of nowhere.
They've been setting this scene up the entire episode. They've been showing his panic attack. He mentions 3 separate moments in the show that you've already seen where if you look back and pay attention to Pedro Pascal's reactions, you'll see the subtle nods building up to this scene. And you're trying to tell me it comes out of nowhere. Please do some fucking research before you want to throw out these dumbass accusations toward the show. For the love of God.
The idea here is that they're changing the context as to why Joel wants Tommy to take Ellie the rest of the way to the Fireflies. In the original game, it's because Joel was getting too attached to Ellie, and he couldn't let himself love her like he loved his daughter.
And why would he be scared of loving someone? Because he didn't want to go through the pain of losing that person again. It's the same in the show, they just did it in a different way that was more realistic to who Joel was in the show and the world that they've been showing.
In the show, it's more like he already loves her, which again is not earned because the characters haven't had enough interaction.
No, he does not, or there would have not been that scene in the bedroom at all. He'd already be calling her what he calls his daughter like he does in the 8th episode by now. He cares about her. That is a completely different thing from love.
It just feels like a switch was magically flipped off screen. And so, of course, Ellie is listening to this conversation, and instead of running away and Joel and Tommy have to chase her down and kill some more evil raiders, of course there's no fucking action in this show, so instead we just skip to one of my favorite moments from the game. But of course, the acting is inferior in every way to the original. I'll just show you a side-by-side here.
Yeah, I 100% agree with him there. They did not get this scene down as good as the game did, which is a shame because it's honestly the most iconic scene from the game, but oh well.
And then magically, overnight, Joel decides, no, he is good enough to take her across the state.
And that's how it goes in the fucking game. Jesus Christ, do you have fucking Demenstra?
And since there's no evil raiders, no action, no killing, no moment of realization that only he's good enough to take her across the country, again, it just doesn't feel earned.
Actually, yeah, that's a really good point. Right between those two scenes of the bedroom and Joel saying he was gonna take Ellie would have been a great place for an action sequence, because I'm not gonna lie, while it does follow exactly how it did in the game, it still kind of doesn't make sense that Joel randomly does a 180 and decides to take Ellie in the game either. So yeah, they could have fixed that pretty easily, but oh well. Also, just elaborating on the point he was making there, he says in the game they had an action sequence that showed Joel why he needs to take Ellie across the country. And well, yes, they had an action sequence. It was just another action sequence, and Joel didn't like learn anything from it. If he did, there would have been like a random dialogue part of Joel like yelling at Tommy to keep up with him, or him calling out Tommy for not helping enough. So it does the same amount of effort showing Joel's 180 he makes as the show does.
Then at the end of the episode, we skip ahead. They reach the university. Of course, the Fireflies aren't there. We see the escaped monkeys that were experimented on. And we finally get a moment of confrontation with just one guy. Joel barely wins a 1v1 and gets stabbed by a broken baseball bat. How do we go from the game Joel killing hundreds of people and infected to the show version maybe killing a dozen of each over the course of the entire season?
Because this is not the killing machine Joel from the game, and this is not the same world from the game either. Except in that last episode for some reason, which I won't lie, yeah, the show is really inconsistent with which Joel they want him to be, but that's not even your fucking complaint. Holy shit!
Is it more realistic? Yes. But it is also way more boring, and contributes to this Joel just being far inferior and pathetic and weak, and it makes it seem like luck is the only reason he was able to deliver Ellie across the country.
Yeah, and in the game it was luck too. Again, do you know how many plot contrivances are in that damn game? I mean, thank God Ellie landed on David's group in the middle of a fucking forest, and that he had the medicine, and that Joel somehow healed like fucking Wolverine and managed to get up right before David was about to hunt down Joel and kill Ellie.
This is what happens when you go from a video game to a TV show. Is it arguably a better medium to cover a game story than movies? I would say yes. But because this season is only 9 episodes long, this ends up feeling like a Cliff's Notes of the first game. For all these people saying they can finally enjoy the story of The Last of Us with their parents, did you really come out of this feeling like it was the actual story from the game?
I did, because I thought all the little stuff they changed, I thought made the overall story way better for setting up the major events that happened towards the end of the season. All the characters felt pretty accurate to the game, and yeah, I think they got the game down pretty accurately.
Gameplay itself can be an important part of video game storytelling. To me, it's the most important part by far, given that video games are an interactive medium. So when you actually cut out all of the gameplay, they don't even attempt to convert 95% of the encounters into a scene in the show, that contributes to it being a bad adaptation.
Yeah, I agree. The show definitely needed more action in it, but like after a while, the encounters they convert would get really tedious to watch, and it'd be essentially like watching a really well shot let's play of the game. In a game, these encounters work because you're playing through them and it's part of the fun. When you're just watching them, it gets really boring unless the encounters have something cool going on in them instead of them just being basic shootout number 344, which The Last of Us definitely has a lot of interesting encounters in it, but those make up maybe like half the game, give or take. So yeah, at most ideally they should have had half the encounters that were in the game in the show.
I feel like if you're arguing otherwise, you don't even really like video games, do you? You just want to play an interactive movie, which explains why Sony games are so popular these days. Then we get to episode 7, the second time the entire plot gets derailed. At least this time it was a canon story, though I couldn't even tell you how accurate it is because I refuse to this day to actually play the Left Behind DLC, as not only is this when Neil Druckmann took over the story of The Last of Us, but it's also an underage lesbian love story.
Guys, he's pulling a quantum TV, sexualizing minors. Oh no, all teenage love is just a myth to turn us all into woke liberals.
Give me a single reason I should care about this. For all the people who told me wanting Atreus and Angrboda to show any kind of romantic interest in each other is pedophilia, you guys sure do love your underage lesbian love stories.
He is not fucking doubling down on his creepy ass take from the God of War video, is he? My fucking god, no. Him getting mad at Atreus and Angrboda not having romantic interest in each other was creepy as shit. Not just because they were underage, but the fact that he saw a boy and a girl on screen and his immediate thought was, why aren't they fucking? Like, what?
It doesn't even matter because despite literally being given a waifu, he doesn't show any sexual interest in her whatsoever. Yeah. She's a child, bro. They're the last two of the species, dude, and it's ancient Norse. Okay, someone educate this blank slate. These are ancient times. The fucking age of consent didn't exist.
Uh-oh, that sounds like pedophilia. Stop!
Can you really blame us for thinking that's, you know, a little fucking creepy? You look at his stream clip of him playing the game too. Yeah, it's pretty fucking weird. And then you're gonna bitch at my underage relationships here to try to somehow call us hypocrites? Yeah, hell no. This just proves he has double standards for gay relationships, which, I mean, we already knew that from his reaction to the Bill episode, but here it is again. If Angrboda and Atreus had a thing for each other in God of War Ragnarok, that would be fine, who cares? And it's fine in The Last of Us HBO and how it goes in the game. The problem again comes in where you were expecting these two people portrayed as underage to be all over each other. Nobody had like a demand for Ellie and Riley to kiss. That's kind of what makes Left Behind so good. But during your God of War playthrough, you were just like, why aren't they fucking? He should be a horny teenage boy and be trying to fuck something at every second. Like, what the actual hell?
I know calling you people a hypocrite is a waste of fucking time. You have no standards, you have no ethics, you have no morality.
Says the guy who docked points off of a game because two underage characters weren't romantically interested in each other. Right.
If your side does it, it's okay. If my side does it, it's bad. I get it.
Except your side didn't even do what they did in The Last of Us. You just complained that underage characters weren't all over each other. The Last of Us had two girls kiss in a consensual way. These two situations aren't comparable at all.
That's been drilled into my head for like 8 years at this point. So I think actually reviewing this episode is a waste of time, much like actually reviewing episode 3 would be a waste of time.
Well, you did it anyway with episode 3, and it was fucking god-awful.
We all know why this exists. It's virtue signaling, it's normalization, it's propaganda.
Yep, this is propaganda now, trying to turn all our kids gay because we have two girls kissing in a TVMA show that kids should definitely not be watching. It's still trying to turn all our kids gay. Think of the children, man. Think of the children. Except the ones he wanted to see fucking God of War. Fuck those kids.
You know. And hopefully, eventually, the normies will wake up and smell the roses with this shit.
You fucking sound like Michael Does Life right there.
But probably not. So I really have no sympathy for them at this point.
Oh no, normies, you just lost your greatest defender, Synthetic Man. Who will save you from the woke mob now?
So on to episode 8. This one was actually almost a great adaptation. if not for one little subtle change in there.
Let me guess, he's gonna complain about how David was quote-unquote changed to be a Christian, isn't he? And then say that The Last of Us is slandering the good name of Christianity, as if there isn't a new case coming out every other week of a priest being a fucking pedophile. I'm just calling this shit right now.
That again, I think most people probably didn't even notice, but the cannibal pedo is also a Christian priest.
What can I say? This man is more predictable than the zombies in this show. And he was fucking Christian in the game too. You look at the restaurant in the game, you'll see the same banner they have in the game. They just went all the way in the show to make him a preacher because they had time to cut away from Joel and Ellie's perspective and show his perspective. And having him being a Christian isn't really interesting, honestly. Who the fuck cares? It isn't like the show makes the implication that all Christians are pedophiles or something. Now that, I would get an outrage coming from people because that's slandering an entire group of people, and that's really problematic. But no, it's one guy, one single guy in this group of about like 50 people.
But a fake priest, as he was a teacher before the apocalypse and claims he found God. But guess what? It's all bullshit.
It's not bullshit, he's just a hypocrite, which again is an improvement on the game, and it makes him feel like way more of a shitty person. Also, I love the fact that David looks like Dreamcast guy in that episode. That shit was funny as fuck.
How many times have we seen this trope before? I know I've seen it several times already. And it's always a priest.
He's not even a priest, he's a preacher. They specifically say that. There's a huge difference. Is it some sort of commentary on the Christian society? Maybe. But he's not a fucking priest. Again, look into this shit. It takes like 5 minutes.
You're never gonna see an evil rabbi, I can promise you that.
Yeah, I'll admit the double standards with society is pretty problematic. I'll be 100% honest right there.
But honestly, other than this small change, it was decently faithful to the game, I'll say that. Any problems that I might have had with this episode's story or the sequence of the game honestly isn't really even worth mentioning. Yeah, it's pretty hard to believe that a 14-year-old girl did all this shit. But in a video game, all of that is much more believable, especially if you're playing as the character. My major complaint here is they once again cut out a major encounter with the infected in the abandoned lumber mill, which was a pretty cool sequence. By this point in the show, you'll probably have even forgotten it's a fucking zombie IP, because zombies are really only a plot device in this show, much like The Walking Dead, which honestly is just lame. I've seen that shit before. I used to watch The Walking Dead regularly, even when it was kind of mediocre.
Hasn't The Walking Dead like always been mid though? I never watched the show. I played the first Telltale game, and honest to God, that shit was mid as fuck. Now that game has some actual plot holes and really tedious gameplay. Why don't you review that next?
I don't want to see that same crap again, just with a Last of Us coat of paint on it. And my other minor complaint is that Joel once again seems super weak here.
Bro, he takes out 6 guys like they're nothing a week after he got stabbed in the stomach. Not to mention they reenact the one torture scene from the game perfectly here, which was fucking awesome to watch. How the fuck do you come to the conclusion that he's weak? Because he doesn't mow down hundreds of people in the span of 10 seconds? Well, he's a fucking human. Again, not the Terminator.
Yes, it makes more sense considering he's still injured, but this was yet another missed opportunity of him killing at least a handful of people on his way to Ellie.
Were you taking a shit or something during the 5-minute action sequence of him beating everyone's ass? What the fuck were you doing while watching the show? I genuinely want to know.
That could have at least been kind of cool. Oh, and they completely dropped the ball on the fact that this sequence is supposed to take place during a blizzard. They throw a light smattering of snow in one shot, and that's pretty much it.
Because the game has more of you walking around during the sequence. The blizzard doesn't really matter here. It serves really no help to the plot. Honestly, probably it was only there for padding so the player would get more lost during that sequence in the game. Since you're not playing in the show, they can just cut it out.
I will say one minor cool detail of this episode is that Troy Baker does play Pedo Cannibal's right-hand man, so the actual real Joel at least is in the show, and he gets killed by Ellie, which there's something poetic about the fake Ellie killing the real Joel. So now we get to the finale of the show, and it starts right off with some unnecessary additional cringe as we see Ashley Johnson, the original Ellie, is playing Ellie's mother in the show. and she runs to some house in the country, which I believe is supposed to be the one from The Last of Us 2.
Where are you getting this shit from? Because it's a farm and they go to a farm in Last of Us 2. Ellie is out in Boston at the beginning of the show. Their farm in Last of Us 2 is like a couple miles out from Jackson, and it would be an insane coincidence that Ellie somehow managed to make her way back up to the house that she was born in accidentally. Because by the end of this episode, everyone who's gonna remember where that house is fucking dead.
And apparently she's fleeing a zombie while heavily pregnant with Ellie.
Heavily pregnant? The fuck? This is some King Thrash level grammar. Holy shit. Oh yeah, her pregnancy is so heavy. How is she gonna lift it up? This shit is so bad. Oh my god.
She locks herself in a room, the zombie breaks in and bites her, she knifes it to death, and then gives birth to Ellie right there. Yeah, this is some soap opera tier writing bullshit.
How is it like that? I mean, it's contrived a little, I guess, but it isn't like The Last of Us has been a stranger to plot contrivances from the beginning. I mean, thank God Joel happened to bump into Ellie and Marlene literally the exact night they were leaving to take her to the Fireflies outside of Boston.
So later, Marlene shows up. Ellie's mom makes her promise to take care of Ellie, as they were friends for life. And so Marlene mercy kills Ellie's mom, and then we get back to the present. This part also is pretty one-to-one with the game. It even has the draft moment, which was pretty nice. And once again, another encounter with the infected is cut out of the show, and instead, the Fireflies find the group, and the ending is almost one-to-one, except for one very important detail change that I hope you noticed. In the original version of the game, the ending was purposely left ambiguous as to whether or not the Fireflies would actually be able to produce a cure, which is pretty realistic. Much like we have yet to produce a cure for AIDS or cancer, or really any other number of things.
And it's ambiguous in the show, with Marlene saying the doctor quote-unquote thinks he can make a cure.
That we haven't yet figured out, right? Especially in an apocalypse scenario where we don't have access to all the same knowledge or technical skill that would certainly aid in producing a vaccine or whatever other type of cure they would need. Now, of course, this is a TV show for idiots, and Neil Druckmann wants you to hate Joel.
I've said it a million times at this point. Where are you getting this shit from? If he wanted you to hate Joel, he did a fucking awful job of getting you to do that. Because you look at the reaction to this show, almost everyone unanimously agrees with Joel's decision he makes at the end of the show.
That is exactly why he killed him in The Last of Us Part 2, and he has said multiple times in the past that we're supposed to view Joel as sacrificing all of humanity for one person. In fact, he says it in the creator commentary at the end of this episode.
Yeah! That's what it was always implied he did in the game. The whole point of the game's ending and why it was fucking great was that it was ambiguous of whether Joel did the right thing or not. While he saved a girl's life and finally found someone to love again, you knew that the girl would have wanted to die for the cure, and he took away any chance at getting that cure. Does that make him a bad person? Does that make him a good person? Really, it's neither, because he's always been a morally gray protagonist, and that's what makes The Last of Us' characters so interesting. What the fuck are you talking about? They changed the ending. Holy shit.
We've seen Joel kill. We've seen him lose loved ones. So how do you take that any further? What if it's between saving all of humanity or this one girl? It's the easiest choice he's ever made in his life.
So they have now, in this version, inserted a line where Marlene explains why Ellie's immune.
Our doctor, he thinks that the cordyceps in Ellie has grown with her since birth.
Why is she in surgery?
It produces a kind of chemical messenger. It makes normal cordyceps think that she's cordyceps. It's why she's immune. He's going to remove it from her, multiply the cells in a lab, produce those chemical messengers, and then we can give it to everyone.
They did that in the game, but honestly, I'll give this to him because their explanation kind of doesn't make sense with how the zombies react to her and attack her even though she has the immunity.
Now, you can already probably think of multiple problems with this. First of all, wouldn't that mean that all of the zombies would completely ignore her because she would effectively be one of their, like, hive mind or whatever? But we clearly see her being attacked by the zombies multiple times in this show. So I guess only the fungus itself knows she's one of them and not the zombies which are being controlled by the fungus? How does that work? You could also make the argument that why would cordyceps not grow inside her just because there's already existing cordyceps inside her according to the chemical messenger? Why couldn't there just be more fungus inside her body that would eventually kill her? Even if she didn't turn into a zombie, I would imagine that shit growing inside you would probably eventually kill you.
Yeah. And all this shit was in the game. This part is the suspend your disbelief part for the sake of the story. It's science fiction, keyword fiction. As long as the characters react realistically to the situation like how normal people do, which they do, that's all that matters. Now, granted, the show takes a more realistic approach to this story than the game does, so there you could actually make a pretty good argument of why the show needs to stay attached to reality and make everything as realistic as the rest of the season is, which is fair, and I agree. But in order for them to do that, you'd have to change the ending of The Last of Us. And then if you look at the reaction to The Last of Us 2, changing the ending to the first Last of Us would be career suicide at this point.
Another arguable plot hole is that somehow the doctor, aka Abby's dad, knows exactly how Ellie is immune within hours.
Again, suspend your disbelief. This is how it was in the game. The next few points he makes are all with the same logic, realistic, yes, they make sense, but they were all points that were in the game, which he claims was the last good story game, so I don't know what he wants, so I'm just skipping them. Again, if he brought up how the show tried to make a realistic approach to the game story, and then randomly got back into the over-the-top stuff at the end, that would be absolutely fair, but he never brings that up.
I mean, Joel is knocked out, which realistically, he would only be knocked out for a few minutes unless he had permanent brain damage. But you can just call that a nitpick, whatever. Let's say he was out cold for a few hours, right? Somehow in that time, the doctor discovered exactly how Ellie's immunity worked. So I guess Abby's dad is a fucking super genius, and he probably would have saved humanity by the show's logic. Another plot hole I came up with after thinking for a while is that Marlene explains that they would reproduce more of these chemical messengers by multiplying the cells. If that's the case, even though it is attached to her brain, wouldn't they just be able to cut off a tiny piece of it just to reproduce more? Why would they have to kill her to reproduce more cells of this thing? You can't tell me their surgical skills have regressed to the point where they can't do this surgery non-lethally if they simultaneously also have super genius scientists that can figure out exactly what's wrong with her that fast. But honestly, at the end of the day, none of these arguable plot holes matter, because the real purpose of this additional plot point is to, 1, remove the ambiguity of the ending.
How is the ending less ambiguous because Joel isn't portrayed as a complete hero? If anything, the ending of the show is more ambiguous than the game, because in the show, they change it from just being a vaccine to a cure now.
To make you hate Joel, like I mentioned. And 2, to subliminally tell you to trust the science. That scientists are like gods, and anything they come up with is indisputable fact. The scientific method is fucking meaningless. If the government tells you something, it's correct.
Unless it has anything to do with gay people, trans people, abortions, gender dysphoria, or any of the political issues you absolutely love to talk about, or if it comes from that damn Joe Biden's mouth, that is.
Now, I'm sure some people are going to call me a schizo over that one, but I'm telling you, that's exactly what they were going for, dude. You can choose to believe me or not. But the fact that they basically are telling you in your face that Joel doomed humanity by saving Ellie means that they believe that Abby's dad could have come up with a cure. Or at least with the assistance of all the other unnamed, unseen Firefly scientists that I guess exist or something. Now, if I had to complain about something else, I would also say the sequence where Joel fights his way to Ellie is also far less epic and engaging and interesting. In the game, it was such a tense, important moment because you want to do anything to save Ellie. Unless you're a psychopathic, anti-natalist millennial, apparently there's a lot of those, and want Ellie to die just so that her life has meaning.
No, that's what Ellie said in Last of Us 2. What the fuck are you talking about?
How is it that a cynical, hateful bastard like myself has more of a heart than the average fucking Redditor, dude? And I hate to restate all of my points from the Last of Us remake, remaster video, but the point is, Ellie cannot consent. It doesn't matter if she thought that sacrificing her life for humanity was her choice. It's not. She's a child.
Well, again, it's not Joel's or Marlene's choice either. That choice would go to her parents, but her parents are dead, so there is nobody else but her to choose for her.
Her brain is not finished developing, right? That's why kids can't consent, right? Some of you don't think women can consent till they're 25. So how can they consent to sacrificing their life? But again, if you remove the ambiguity and say, well, humanity would have absolutely been saved, then I might actually change my opinion around the ending. But you know what? I absolutely believe in death of the author, and honestly, Neil Druckmann isn't even the fucking author. That's the truth. Look into that shit.
You gonna show a link, a screenshot of this at least? Because I know everyone loves to say that Neil Druckmann is the prime destroyer of the Last of Us series, but his name was attached to that game. I don't think they just throw on some random person's name on the writing team on a game that took millions of dollars to make. I am all for looking into how big of a role Neil Druckmann played in the writing of The Last of Us, but I am still yet to see a convincing argument, or really any proof at all when people say the first Last of Us was just all Bruce Straley.
Bruce Straley is the author. And honestly, I believe Amy Hennig was more of an author of The Last of Us than Neil Druckmann. I refuse to attribute any good part of this franchise to him. We've seen what happens when he has full creative control, and I can't wait till all of the normies see Season 2 and they get to realize what we saw in 2020, that Neil Druckmann is a fucking hack. That said, I am glad they stuck to the rest of the ending. Even with the change in ambiguity, I still was on Joel's side.
Wait. I thought their goal was to make everyone hate Joel, so why are you still on his side? Because if they really did that, you wouldn't be on his side in the show.
And it still even made me tear up a little bit, even though Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are far inferior to the original versions of the characters. Joel still made the right choice, because I still don't believe in the capability of post-apocalyptic scientists to create a cure. And you know what, honestly, screw humanity, care about the people who care about you, right? Joel cares about his family, and they care about him, and no one else gives a fuck in that heartless world. That's like the point of the story, honestly, for me. Everyone's trying to kill him, infected or human. So Joel's family are the only people who should matter to him. Humanity as a whole can go fuck itself. So final thoughts on The Last of Us Season 1. Like I said at the beginning, it's an almost good adaptation. I'd say as a whole, it's about 80% accurate to the parts of the game that were actually adapted, because plenty of it was cut out. Like I said, 95% of the combat encounters, possibly more, and Episode 3 was 0% accurate to the game, so honestly, it's maybe closer to 70% accurate to the game.
No, Billstown had the same overall purpose it did in the game, to get Joel and Ellie the car, to get across the country faster. They just developed Bill and Frank way more in the show. I'd say it was like more closer to 25% really. I mean, still not good, but I don't really care.
And the fact that they covered the DLC means that 2 out of the 9 episodes had almost nothing to do with the overall plot. I really don't care about Ellie's backstory at all. Joel is the main character, no matter what anybody will tell you. Yes, Ellie and Abby are the main characters of the sequel, but the sequel sucks. Joel is the main character of The Last of Us. It's his story. Ellie is a fucking plot device that we, as the player base, grow to love like a daughter over the course of the game. That's the point. And that's another way that the show kind of just dropped the ball, because Joel and Ellie's relationship was not nearly as developed as the game. Now, of course, it never quite stood a chance, but if they had at least covered all the most important moments, it would have been a bit better than this. And again, I'm just going to leave out Bella Ramsey as a whole from that equation, but I do think, disregarding her looks, her acting is also somewhat questionable as well. I just think it's difficult for her to emote. Maybe it's part of her... I can't even fucking say this with a straight face. Whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. And Pedro Pascal's Joel is not Joel. He's a weak, emasculated, beaten down old man, instead of a hardened, killing machine who's closed his heart to everything because his daughter died, and he's been through some real shit. Horrible, horrible things. So of course he's not going to let himself love another person. That's partially why his and Tess's relationship was left ambiguous, at least that's what I believe. Because he couldn't let himself love someone again. But then over the course of the game, he finally opens up his heart, and he can't sacrifice Ellie, right? That's the whole point of the story. How do you mess that up?
You're right. How did they mess that up? Because I'm not seeing how they messed it up.
And somehow I almost forgot to mention, you may notice, none of the major characters in this show are straight white males. Joel and Tommy are Hispanic, Bill and Frank are gay, Henry and Sam are black, I guess there was that one military guy who served alongside the short, shrill psycho woman, but he's certainly not a major character. I'm not even sure if he was given a name.
No, there was David. But yeah, the showrunners forced him, A Clockwork Orange style, to watch this show with next to no straight white males. How sad. How will you ever recover? It's not like there aren't straight white males as main characters in a million different properties. Or you could just play the game again, which you keep saying is way better and does have a straight white male as its main character. Or that being straight, white, or male doesn't matter at all when telling a story that has nothing to do with race. All this shit of race, gender, and politics is such a useless talking point. Because again, genuinely, who the fuck cares? Explain to me how it negatively affects the story. Granted, it doesn't positively affect the story either, but I don't think anybody said that, just that the bitching is a waste of breath, which it is.
And pretty much every other major character is female. And again, if you don't think that's intentional, you're either naive or you're lying. So Joel's race swap is even more important when you put it in this context. So yeah, I think that the midwit take on this show is going to be that it's the greatest video game adaptation ever because look at all these scenes and exact lines from the game. Okay, sure, but all of the finer details were screwed up, as I covered extensively.
Your only talking points in this video that have been fair, aside from the stuff on the acting and the lack of action scenes that I mentioned, have been tiny nitpicks complaining about expansions on what the game had already implied, or just straight up wrong.
And episode 3 is just inexcusable. Seriously, how can you come up with any good reason as to why that's in this show? You can't. Not to mention it butchered one of the better one-off characters from the game. So at the end of the day, is it a terrible show? No. And like I said, I was watching this with my own mother, as some of you have been, and she enjoyed the show, so that's why I think a lot of the normies are going to end up enjoying this. But for people like me who actually did like the game, and yeah, it's not one of my favorite games, but I think it's one of the last truly great story games. Ironically, it's also been blamed for popularizing movie games that are now everywhere in the last 9 years.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say it was all The Last of Us' fault. It would probably have to go to Uncharted as well, but I can't really name any other movie games that were huge successes that came out around this time that would have popularized this subgenre.
And I really had no expectations for a video game adaptation to be good, but it does infuriate me when people pretend it's way better than it actually is. It's definitely overrated, no question.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. Again, from the lack of zombies, scenes that were cut from the game, weird acting in some places, bad pacing sometimes, it's not perfect. I'd probably give it like an 8.5 out of 10 if we were doing this on the number scale, but calling it woke, or as you like to put it, SJW propaganda, that's just fucking stupid. Again, the fact that you failed to criticize this show that was very easy to criticize on its stupid shit in it is actually embarrassing.
So yeah, sure, it's not a terrible show. I probably could come up with good things to say about it, but I don't really see what the point is. For my audience, at least the people I'm trying to talk to when I make these videos, you can just play the game and get a much better experience than watching the show. So there's really no reason for the show to exist for people like you and me. So yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it probably is one of the better video game adaptations, but that does not mean it's good. So I guess I'll reluctantly call it an acceptable adaptation, but all of the political propaganda put such a bad taste in my mouth that I can't really recommend it to anybody. I despise all the wokeness crap. The fact that a game that is not even 10 years old yet, and don't think I didn't notice that Craig Mazin got that wrong in the commentary at the end.
That is such a tiny fucking nitpick that has nothing to do with the show. Please just stop talking and end the video already so I can go the fuck to bed.
The ending is something that people have been arguing about for over a decade.
It has to be modernized for the new far left audience that it's trying to appeal to, all the crazy fucking woke shit. It's just gross to me. I've got really nothing else to say about it. I guess as a last note, I'm looking forward to the backlash against Season 2 of the show. See you next time, guys.
And I am cautiously optimistic for Season 2 that they will have the self-awareness to admit that there were a lot of mistakes made in Part 2 and be able to fix them in Season 2. I mean, it's not going to be small changes if they want to fix them. It's got to be like a lot. They're going to have to probably rewrite the first 2 episodes in it. They're probably going to have to rewrite Abby's entire segment where you play as her for the second half. And they're definitely going to have to not split the show in half and have everything in chronological chronological order like it should have been from the start. Hopefully Craig Mazin keeps Neil under wraps with the second season and not having Haley Strauss on the writing team. And again, to the writers, please listen to the criticism of part 2. Like, I know a lot of the stuff people said about that game is a bunch of bullshit, but holy shit, part 2 is a fucking mess. And a lot of the stuff that people said about that game is really valid. Like I said, part 2 is like the character of Kathleen, but on a massive scale. It has the bones of being a pretty solid story, but it was never given the justice by the writers that it deserved. I still appreciate the attempt though. Anyways, that was actually fucking awful. Like, I really think it was worse than his God of War video from last year. It has every dumbass talking point he brought up in that translated over to The Last of Us, with him literally just making shit up to try to make the show seem woke at some points, and just straight up not understanding what the fuck is happening in it. If this video goes anything like the last video I did on Synthetic Man, this video is probably gonna get dislike bombed into oblivion, so you know, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great day. Okay, this is post-editing Josh. Holy shit, this video is like an hour and 10 minutes. I was not expecting it to go on for this long, but since it did, please, for the love of God, fucking like and subscribe, because this was so painful to get through. Anyways, yeah, thanks again. Bye.
What are you going to do?